Now, when we talk about that information security policy, that document should be subdivided into different groups, such as the high-level information as far as the security policy. It could be in a group called the data classification policy. What's sensitive, if you're in the military, what's secret, what's top secret, what's confidential, those types of things. An acceptable usage policy. Now there we go. That's a part of security as well. As I just got through saying, I knew of a company that got rid of a high-level manager for inappropriate use of email. And that's a big deal, right, many times. And here's the issue, is that they don't want corporate secrets to go out through email. They don't want, basically people wasting their time on the company's payroll, playing around when they shouldn't be, and many other things that they look at in a lot of security policies, including, a lot of companies, they're just like, wow, we're paying people almost half a day to just go to Facebook when they don't work at Facebook, but that's what they're doing. So we have to have those types of things, and of course we know that there are inherent risks with these activities if we're not careful, the download of malware and those things. That also might fall into the end-user computing policy as well. An acceptable use policy might be better to talk about, how I can utilize equipment like the laptop or, the company's phones and those types of things. Whereas the end-user computer policy, you probably see more about the inappropriate of websites that they might go to and the type of content they might be downloading and those things. You probably also want an access control policy. Now, access control is a subject trying to access an object. It could be something as simple as a printer. I fell afoul of one of those policies. Way back in the late 90s, this company I was contracting at got a brand new color laser printer back when those were very, very expensive. And I used it to print holiday cards to send out to the family. And their auditing team caught that I had done this. And apparently it was very expensive. And they asked if I did, and I said, sure I did. But you know what? They didn't have an access control policy. They didn't have anything for an end-user computing policy. And maybe that's because I didn't even give them a chance to really do anything more than plug it in before I started using it. But, again, you need to have those things. And, all right, so it was all right. The owner was a friend. I sent them one of those holiday cards. But we should have those in our policies to be able to control those types of activities. Again, it might be something that does sound as benign as just printing out some stuff. But, we're looking at an overall sense of security and being able to utilize our resources in the best way we can. Now, the acceptable use policy really is an extreme importance to the enterprise because it's important users understand the risks that they can cause an organization by exposing them to things such as virus attacks or other types of compromises on their network systems and services. And that is important because if you think about it, in today's world, we have this, what we call the click attack or the click hijack. And it's even worse than that. We have a mouse over hijack. And what it comes down to is, if I can email you, a link to a web page and say, you need to go fix whatever this is. And they go click onto that web page, and that web page comes up with a lot of script running in the background. Literally, if they move their mouse over a certain area where there's script associated with that area, it can run on that machine. And if they're logged in as anybody with administrative permissions, they could have just been infected. Same with in the old days, 3-4 years ago, just opening up a picture on a web page with certain types of instructions encoded in them would be executed on the machines. And so we just need to be careful. It's very common that we create an acceptable use policy and require employees to sign it and acknowledge before they even get any access to any information. They should understand what they are allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do, at least from the work system part of the network. What they do at home, probably a whole different story, right? We're not going to worry about that unless they're doing things with remote connections. Then we might have to have an appropriate policy for that. Now, it is important for us to remember that we want to review the information in the security policy. And this review should be done at planned intervals or whenever a significant change has occurred in the environment. The inclusion of new software, maybe buying a new company, merging with a company. We need to know that the policy is going to remain adequate and effective under your current state of the organization's information security department. During the review, there should be opportunities for further improvement of the security policy as well. Now, as an IS auditor, the tasks that are presented to you for the policy review should be things on how often is the policy reviewed, when was it defined, and again, we want to know as well what basis did it come from. And generally we're saying, well, I hope a policy came about because we identified a risk that we wanted to address. So many times the basis of a policy is formed from a risk management process. We want to review the contents of the policy. We need to know if there are any exceptions to the policy and why they're there, what might be acceptable exceptions to that policy. There should be a policy approval process. We want to look at and review that process. We need to know how it's been effectively implemented, because remember, a policy is a blueprint, right? So we want to look at how was this policy interpreted and implemented. How were the employees made aware of the policy? Have they received any training to be able to know and understand the contents of the policy and why it's there? We also need a review or an audit, if you would, of the review and update process as well. Procedures are the detailed steps that we use to help implement a policy. Now, they should come from the parent policy, and their implementation should support the spirit of what the policy was standing for. Now remember, a policy was a big blueprint. It didn't have the specifics of what you're supposed to do, but rather a guiding principle, a guiding policy, I guess is the word, that says what our outcomes, what our goals are. And so the procedures are designed to be that step-by-step process that helps us follow those policies. Now, when we see procedures and we're reading through them, they need to be written clearly and concisely so they can be very easily understood and followed. Remember, as I said, they are designed as steps. So these steps should be created by the process owners, and they should reflect a translation of the security policies. If I just go outside of this little realm of thinking of IT and information systems, if you look at a recipe for baking a cake, you have these steps, right? It says to mix these ingredients in order first, then to do this, and if you don't follow those instructions, things come out weird, so they're designed to be steps, because in that case, the policy was to, get a nice cake, I suppose. But the goal was by the owner, by the person who created this thing, is to reflect the way in which your steps should be followed to be able to get to that end point where you have successfully followed the policy. And at the same time, there should be a translation of the security policies in there as well. Now, I'm not quite sure where I might throw that into the baking the cake, other than maybe don't stick your hand in the mixer or something like that. Anyway, you can take those and hopefully I translated that analogy in a way that makes sense of procedures. Now, procedures are designed to be more dynamic, and they could be subject to frequent changes, especially, if I had a procedure on how to send an email, and then suddenly we've got an upgrade to the email client that has moved some of the buttons that you click on around, right? So that can make a procedure change. So your procedures need to be reviewed probably more often than the overall policy. And I'm not saying a policy shouldn't be reviewed, but procedures should be reviewed to reflect changes in the way in which you're trying to get to that same policy. As an auditor, you should review the procedures to be able to evaluate their effectiveness. That means you should determine that the procedures meet the control objectives, and at the same time making the process efficient and practical. Now, that's an important process, because if you think about it, if you're doing this audit where you're actually watching people perform their jobs and asking them questions, and you start comparing what they do with the procedures that are outlined, and you notice that they're not following the procedures step by step, it doesn't mean necessarily that they're wrong, that maybe they have found a better or more efficient or more practical method to get to the same end point. Then again, the shortcuts they may be taking might be skipping certain needs for security. So that's where you need to look at the procedures, understand what the control objectives are, and at the same time make sure that it does appear to be as efficient and practical as it can. If these operational practices aren't in line with the procedures, then they should be documented, right? Again, if you find that the way users are enacting their duties doesn't follow the procedures, and you can find out that it's a legitimate reason, or even if it's not legitimate, either way, those deviations need to be documented, they need to be reviewed. You need to make sure that the procedures are well known by the people who use them. If they're not well known, then essentially those procedures are useless because nobody's following them. As an auditor, you should make sure that the procedures are documented, make sure they're understood, and that they're being implemented.